Hey everyone, how are you all doing today? Tonight we're traveling back to a time of castles, candlelight and courtly intrigue, the medieval era, where beauty wasn't just a matter of personal style, but a reflection of your status, your virtue, and even your perceived worth as a human being. In this journey, we'll uncover the strange, sometimes surprising, and often demanding beauty standards that shape the lives of men and women in a world very different from our own. From the noble courts of Europe to the bustling markets of medieval towns, beauty was a form of currencies, something that could open doors, secure marriages, and even influence political alliances. So take a seat by the fire, imagine the sound of distant church bells echoing through narrow streets, and let us step into a world where beauty was more than skin deep. It was an unspoken language everyone had to learn. In medieval society, appearance was rarely left to chance. A person's face, hair, and clothing told a story long before they spoke a single word. To the nobility, beauty wasn't merely desirable, it was a sign of divine favor, proof that you were blessed by God and worthy of your position. For peasants, the picture was different. Physical health and sturdiness often counted more than delicate features, since survival depended on hard work in the fields. But across all classes, certain ideals were shared, whispered from troubadours' songs to the verses of court poets. Fair skin was prized, not only because it was associated with nobility who didn't labor under the sun, but also because it was thought to reflect purity of soul. Smooth hands, bright eyes, and well-kept hair were signs that you had the means and the time to care for yourself. And while modern beauty standards often change with fashion seasons, in the Middle Ages they could last for centuries, reinforced by tradition, religion, and the slow spread of ideas across the continent. This meant that a young woman in 14th century France might aspire to the very same look her great-grandmother had been praised for and faced the same pressure to achieve it. In the courts and castles of medieval Europe, the ideal woman was painted in poetry and song as a vision of delicate perfection. She was fair-skinned, with cheeks that glowed softly like the petals of a rose. Her hair, ideally golden or a pale shimmering blonde, was worn long and loose in youth, a symbol of purity, and later bound or veiled after marriage. The forehead, curiously enough, was considered one of the most beautiful features. A high, smooth brow was so prized that some women plucked or even shaved the hair at their hairline to give the illusion of greater height. Eyebrows were thinned or removed entirely, the better to create a serene, unbroken expanse of skin from hairline to eyes. Eyes were described in romantic literature with a language that bordered on the mystical. Deep blue or gray eyes were especially admired in the West, while dark, almond-shaped eyes were celebrated in Southern Europe. A gentle downward gaze was preferred over bold or direct eye contact, which could be read as improper or overly forward. The lips of the ideal woman were small and delicate, often enhanced with subtle tints from crushed berries or tinted bombs. A soft, heart-shaped face was favored, with a chin neither too sharp nor too round. Above all, the overall impression had to be one of refinement and modest beauty that suggested inner virtue as much as outer charm. But achieving this look wasn't simply a matter of good fortune. Many women went to surprising lengths, some harmless, others dangerous to fit the mold, using herbal skin lighteners, hair treatments, and cosmetics made from substances that today would be considered toxic. In a society where beauty could determine a marriage match or a family's fortunes, the stakes were high. While women's beauty was often tied to notions of purity and delicacy, the ideal medieval man was shaped by ideals of strength, honor, and noble bearing. His appearance was expected to project both physical capability and moral authority, a combination that signaled leadership and trustworthiness in a world where personal reputation was everything. Height and a well-proportioned frame were highly valued, especially among the nobility, who often trained from boyhood in riding, hunting, and swordplay. Broad shoulders and a straight, upright posture conveyed readiness for battle, while a lean but muscular build suggested both discipline and vitality. Facial hair trends varied by region and era. In some periods, a neatly trimmed beard or mustache was a mark of maturity and authority. In others, a clean-shaven face was favored, especially in courtly settings where youthfulness and refinement were prized. Regardless of style, grooming matted unkempt hair or an unkempt beard could be read as a sign of laziness or lower status. The hair itself was ideally thick and healthy, with shades ranging from golden to dark chestnut, often praised in poetry. Knights and noblemen might wear it longer, sometimes curling at the ends, while townsmen often opted for shorter, practical styles. Just as with women, a clear, fair complexion was admired, not only for its association with good health, but also because it implied a life free from the grueling outdoor labor of the peasant class. Clothing, too, played a part in male beauty standards. Well-fitted tunics, rich fabrics, and fine belts or cloaks were as much a part of the ideal as natural features, signaling wealth, taste, and position. A man's appearance could strengthen his alliances, attract a desirable marriage, or help him rise in courtly favor. Ultimately, the medieval man was expected to look like someone who could protect his land and lead in war, yet also move gracefully in the refined, rule-bound world of the noble court. Strength and elegance had to coexist, creating a balance that was as much about perception as reality. Maintaining the medieval ideal of beauty was not a passive affair, it required effort, ingenuity, and, at times, a willingness to experiment with risky practices. Without modern skincare products or salon treatments, men and women turned to a blend of herbal remedies, homemade cosmetics, and imported luxuries to craft the desired look. For the skin, fairness was the ultimate goal. Women often used face washes made from a mixture of milk, rosewater, and herbs like chamomile or elderflower to cleanse and soften the complexion. Some went further, applying pastes made from ground almonds or bread soaked in wine as masks to refresh the skin. In the wealthier courts, imported powders of rice or lead-based white paint were applied to achieve a paler tone, beautiful by the standards of the time, but dangerous in the long run. Hair care was equally important. Rinses made from rosemary, nettle, or vinegar were popular for keeping hair shiny and manageable. Blonde hair was especially sought after, leading some women to use saffron-infused concoctions or even sun-bleaching techniques to lighten their locks. Men, too, took pride in grooming, combing and oiling their hair, trimming beards carefully, and occasionally scenting themselves with herbs or floral oils to make a good impression. Teeth, though harder to maintain by modern standards, were sometimes cleaned with cloths dipped in wine or herbal mixtures. Bad breath could be masked by chewing parsley, cloves, or anise seeds. Perfumes and scented sachets, worn close to the body or sewn into clothing, helped create an overall aura of refinement. Even clothing maintenance was part of beauty upkeep. Fine fabrics had to be brushed, perfumed, and kept free of visible wear. The presentation of one's garments was nearly as important as the presentation of one's face, since both spoke of wealth, hygiene, and care for detail. In short, medieval beauty routines were a careful mix of natural remedies, imported and an occasional willingness to endure discomfort or danger, all in service of meeting a standard that society, and often survival, demanded. In the medieval world, beauty was rarely seen as a matter of taste alone. It was deeply tied to religion, morality, and the belief that outward appearance reflected the state of the soul. This idea, rooted in both Christian theology and ancient philosophy, meant that looking good was not simply about aesthetics. It was a visible sign of one's inner virtue. The church played a powerful role in shaping these ideals. Sermons, religious texts, and even stained glass imagery reinforced the association between physical beauty and divine favor. The Virgin Mary, for example, was almost universally depicted as serene, graceful, and physically perfect, her image becoming a template for how noble women, in particular, were expected to present themselves. Fairness of skin, purity of expression, and modesty in dress were praised as outward reflections of chastity, humility, and piety. For men, a noble bearing, clean appearance, and dignified dress conveyed not only wealth and breeding, but also the moral strength expected of leaders and protectors. A knight whose appearance was sloppy or unkempt risked more than mockery. He risked casting doubt on his honor and capability. This belief that beauty equaled virtue created both opportunities and pressures. A beautiful woman could attract a wealthy husband or earn favor at court, but she was also expected to live up to the moral standard her looks implied. Likewise, a handsome man might be assumed to possess courage and wisdom, but any failure to act accordingly could lead to accusations of vanity or deceit. In many ways, beauty served as a silent but powerful form of social currency, one that could elevate or condemn. And because these ideals were reinforced by both religious authority and cultural tradition, they were nearly impossible to escape. Whether noble or commoner, man or woman, everyone lived under the gaze of a society that judged not only what you did, but how you looked while doing it. Although we often speak of medieval beauty standards as if they were the same everywhere, the truth is far more complex. Europe in the Middle Ages was a patchwork of kingdoms, cultures, and climates, and each region shaped its own vision of what was beautiful. In the cooler, northern parts of the continent such as England, Flanders, and the German states, fair skin and light hair were often celebrated, partly because these traits were common among the nobility and reinforced by centuries of local storytelling and art. A rosy flush in the cheeks, achieved naturally by cold weather or with a dab of herbal tint, was seen as a sign of vitality. In the Mediterranean regions, including Italy, Spain, and parts of southern France, beauty ideals could differ sharply. Darker hair and eyes were often praised, especially when paired with olive-toned skin that glowed in the sun. In these warmer climates, long, thick, dark hair was considered a mark of sensuality and strength, celebrated in poetry and song. Class differences also played a major role. For nobles, soft, unblemished skin and slender, graceful bodies were the goal features that spoke of a life free from physical labor. Among peasants, however, ideals were often shaped by necessity. Strength, sturdy builds, and a healthy sun-kissed complexion were valued because they reflected the ability to work hard and endure. Trade and travel also influenced beauty trends. As merchants and pilgrims moved between regions, they brought with them fabrics, cosmetics, and even grooming tools that introduced new possibilities. An Italian noblewoman might adopt a Flemish-style headdress, or a French knight might wear perfumed oils learned of during the Crusades. These exchanges blurred boundaries, creating a rich tapestry of overlapping ideals. In the end, medieval beauty was never truly one thing, it was many things at once, shaped by geography, climate, economy, and culture. What was prized in one court might be overlooked in another, and beauty itself was always a mirror reflecting the values and realities of the society that defined it. In a world where appearance was often seen as a reflection of virtue, failing to meet the beauty standards of the day could have very real consequences. While not everyone could achieve the ideal, the pressure to at least strive toward it was immense, especially for those whose futures depended on marriage alliances, social mobility, or courtly favor. For women, straying too far from the accepted ideal could mean fewer marriage prospects, diminished dowries, or being overlooked at court. Chronic illness, visible scars, or features considered unfashionable might lead to whispers, mockery, or cruel nicknames. A woman who dressed too plainly risked being dismissed as unworthy of attention, while one who dressed too extravagantly could be accused of vanity or moral corruption. Men, too, were judged. A knight or nobleman who appeared weak, ungroomed, or physically unimpressive could struggle to command respect, both on the battlefield and in the council hall. In a culture where reputation was everything, an unflattering first impression could be a lasting one. For commoners, the consequences were subtler but still significant. A peasant woman who did not meet local beauty ideals might still marry, but perhaps to a man of lower status or with fewer resources. A craftsman whose appearance suggested poor health or lack of discipline might lose customers or fail to attract apprentices. This harsh reality fueled an entire culture of self-presentation, where people worked sometimes desperately to control how others saw them. Remedies, cosmetics, clothing choices, and even posture became tools to navigate the social landscape. But there was always risk. A poorly applied cosmetic could damage the skin, an overly ambitious outfit could draw ridicule, and standing out for the wrong reasons could be socially fatal. In the medieval mind, beauty was not simply an accident of birth, it was a social duty, and for those who could not, or would not, conform, life could be lonelier, harsher, and far less forgiving. In the medieval world, beauty was more than a matter of pleasing the eye, it was a coded language, a silent conversation between the wearer and the watcher. Every color, fabric, and physical trait could communicate something about your identity, your intentions, and your place in the social order. Clothing was one of the most obvious markers. Rich fabrics like silk, velvet, and fine wools spoke of wealth and influence, while colors were carefully chosen for their symbolic weight. Deep crimson might suggest power or royal connection, blue could evoke loyalty and piety, and green was often tied to themes of fertility, youth, or even romantic interest. In some regions, laws called sumptuary laws restricted certain colors and fabrics to the nobility, meaning that merely wearing them without permission could result in fines or punishment. Accessories were equally telling. A jeweled belt or an intricately worked brooch could signal not only affluence, but also taste and refinement. The cut of a gown or the length of a man's cloak could hint at regional fashions or political alliances. Even hairstyles were strategic. A woman might wear her hair in elaborate braids to emphasize her youth and status, while a knight could trim his hair to show discipline and military readiness. Physical traits themselves were read like emblems. A tall stature could imply strength and leadership. Slender fingers suggested that one did not work the fields. A well-fed frame in certain contexts hinted at prosperity, though excess weight could also be criticized as indulgent. Scars could be interpreted in two ways. On a man, they might be seen as badges of honor from battle. On a woman, they could unfortunately be read as blemishes that lessened her beauty in the eyes of a judgmental society. These unspoken symbols were part of the daily performance of medieval life. People moved through their communities carrying their status, intentions, and reputations on their very bodies, whether they liked it or not. And because so much could be communicated without a single word, mastering this silent language was just as important as speaking eloquently at court or behaving with proper manners. In the Middle Ages, beauty wasn't just something people saw in their everyday lives, it was something reinforced and immortalized through art and literature. Paintings, illuminated manuscripts, and epic poems didn't merely reflect the standards of the time, they actively shaped them, creating a feedback loop where the ideal became more rigid with each generation. Religious art was one of the strongest forces in this process. Saints, biblical figures, and especially the Virgin Mary were consistently depicted with features considered perfect serene expressions, symmetrical faces, luminous skin, and graceful postures. These images weren't presented as fashion trends, but as holy representations, making the link between beauty and virtue almost unbreakable. Courtly literature worked in a similar way. Troubadours sang of women with hair like spun gold and eyes like the morning sky, setting impossible standards that lived in the minds of listeners. Romance tales idealized noble knights as tall, broad-shouldered, and perfectly gallant, their appearance reflecting their moral worth. These poetic exaggerations filtered into real life, as nobles sought to model themselves after these fictional paragons. Sculpture and stained glass further cemented these ideals. Cathedrals were filled with carved kings and queens whose faces were eternal masks of grace and authority. Even when depicting common folk in art, the more flattering features were often emphasized, creating an aspirational vision rather than a realistic one. This artistic reinforcement was powerful because it blurred the line between reality and aspiration. If the saints in the church windows looked a certain way, and the heroes of beloved stories matched that same image, then it became easier for society to believe that these traits were not just beautiful, they were right. And so the cycle continued, with beauty standards written not only in fashion and gossip, but in stone, parchment, and song. By the closing centuries of the Middle Ages, Europe was not the same world it had been in the early medieval period, and beauty standards began to reflect that transformation. Trade routes expanded, cities flourished, and contact with distant cultures brought new ideas, materials, and aesthetics into the heart of European life. The Crusades and Mediterranean trade opened channels to the Middle East and beyond, introducing exotic fabrics, perfumes, dyes, and even cosmetic techniques. Rich silks from Byzantium, patterned textiles from Islamic Spain, and vibrant pigments from the East reshaped clothing and makeup trends. Suddenly, colors once reserved for royalty, like deep crimson and lapis blue, appeared in courtly dress, adding layers of visual complexity to the medieval idea of beauty. The influence of Italian city-states, especially during the early stirrings of the Renaissance, began to change physical ideals as well. Art from Florence, Venice, and Siena portrayed women with softer, rounder faces, fuller figures, and elaborate hairstyles adorned with ribbons, beads, or netted veils. The tall foreheads and pale skin of earlier centuries remained fashionable, but there was now an increased appreciation for vitality, sensuality, and individual charm. Men's fashion shifted, while the knightly look of armor and stoic masculinity remained appealing. New tailoring techniques created fitted garments that emphasized a slimmer waist and broad shoulders. Longer, more luxurious hair on men came back into vogue, influenced by depictions of scholars, poets, and artists who projected refinement alongside strength. These shifts were not uniform rule regions, and conservative courts held fast to older ideals. But in Europe's most cosmopolitan centers, the seeds of change were undeniable. Beauty was still a measure of status and virtue, but it was also becoming a reflection of personal taste and the growing spirit of self-expression. What had once been almost entirely dictated by tradition and religion was now being reshaped by commerce, cultural exchange, and the slow emergence of humanist thought. And this transition set the stage for an entirely new chapter in the history of beauty one that would bloom fully in the Renaissance. In the grand theater of medieval life, beauty functioned like a costume one you could not simply remove at the end of the day. Every social interaction was a kind of performance, and your appearance was the opening act. The way you presented yourself could determine whether doors opened in welcome or remained firmly shut. At a noble feast, a lady's gown of velvet and pearls didn't just display wealth. It announced her family's alliances, her husband's influence, and her own skill in navigating courtly expectations. The cut of a man's tunic, the quality of his cloak, even the way his boots were laced, could send unspoken messages about his rank, his ambitions, or his respect for tradition. But the stage extended far beyond royal courts. In a small village, a bride's wedding attire perhaps, a carefully mended gown passed down through generations, was a visual promise of her family's honor and her readiness to take on the responsibilities of married life. A craftsman's clean hands and tidy clothes could inspire trust in his customers, even before a single tool was lifted. The language of beauty in the Middle Ages was rich with symbols. Colors carried meaning. Deep blue could signify loyalty and devotion, while red might hint at passion, power, or even moral danger. Hairstyles and head coverings were equally telling. A veiled head suggested modesty and marital status, while uncovered hair in certain contexts might be read as a statement, sometimes innocent, sometimes provocative, and though few would admit it openly, there was also a subtle pleasure in bending these rules. A young man might wear his hair just a little longer than was proper, or a woman might choose a brighter dye for her gown than was customary for her station. Such small acts of defiance could ripple through their communities, sometimes sparking admiration, sometimes scandal. In this way, beauty was more than an aesthetic ideal. It was a living, breathing code of signs, a shared cultural script in which everyone had a role to play. And like any stage performance, success depended not just on the script itself, but on the skill of the performer. For all its symbolism and ceremony, medieval beauty did not happen by accident. It was constructed, maintained, and sometimes painstakingly fabricated through the use of tools, techniques, and clever improvisations. These were the invisible gears turning behind the polished surface of the medieval look. In noble households, servants played a critical role in this process. Ladies of rank often had attendants whose sole task was to help with hairdressing, the preparation of cosmetic pastes, and the upkeep of fine garments. They might spend hours braiding hair into intricate patterns or arranging veils, so they draped in the most flattering way. Combs carved from bone or ivory, polished to smoothness, were prized possessions, as were small bronze mirrors rare enough to be treasured heirlooms. For the less wealthy, the toolkit was simpler but no less important. A village woman might wash her hair in a rinse of nettle or rosemary, using a carved wooden comb to remove tangles and lice. Men who could not afford scented oils might rub their hair with animal fat to add shine, a practice that was functional, if not entirely pleasant. Soap, often made from animal tallow mixed with lye, was used sparingly and sometimes replaced by sand or ash for scrubbing the skin. Clothing upkeep was another hidden art. Without modern laundering, stains were treated with mixtures of vinegar, chalk, or crushed herbs, and fabrics were hung in the sun to freshen. Wealthier families might send their garments to specialized cleaners, but most people had to be resourceful, patching, darning, and carefully folding clothes to preserve them. Even jewelry served a practical role beyond decoration. Rings, brooches, and pendants often doubled as talismans, carrying charms for health, fertility, or protection from the evil eye. Their craftsmanship and materials told as much about the wearer's resources as their style told about their taste. In truth, much of what was admired as natural beauty in the Middle Ages was the product of these hidden labors, countless small acts of grooming, mending, and preparation that transformed a person's daily appearance into a deliberate statement. And while the most elaborate displays were reserved for the elite, the impulse to enhance and present oneself was universal. The rhythm of the seasons dictated far more than crops and festivals in the Middle Ages. It also quietly shaped the way beauty was perceived, pursued, and maintained. Without climate control or modern lighting, the natural world set the stage for how people looked and what was considered attractive. In the long, dim winters of Northern Europe, pale skin became even more pronounced, both naturally and through deliberate preservation. The weak sunlight meant tans were rare among the upper classes, and maintaining a fair complexion became a subtle mark of privilege, proof that one could stay indoors while others labored in the cold. Clothing during these months leaned heavily on layers of wool, fur, and thick linen, which meant that beauty was expressed mostly through the face and hands, the only parts visible to the outside world. Spring brought its own transformations. Fresher air and longer days encouraged more social gatherings, fairs, and open-air courtship rituals. Hair and garments were scented with flowers and herbs, and people took the opportunity to refresh their wardrobes after months of heavy winter where, in poetry and song, this was the season when rosy cheeks and bright eyes were celebrated most, reflecting not only health but also the renewed energy of life itself. Summer, however, posed challenges for maintaining the noble ideal. The heat deepened tans and lightened hair naturally, creating a sun-kissed look that peasants bore as a sign of labor and some nobles acquired reluctantly. While in the Mediterranean, such features were often celebrated. In the north, they could clash with the high standard of fair, untouched skin. Many noblewomen retreated to shaded gardens or wore wide veils to shield their faces, while men of rank might spend less time on hunts to avoid weathering their appearance. Autumn was both a harvest season and a transitional time for beauty. It was when fabrics grew richer, again velvet, brocade, and deep-dyed wool replaced the lighter summer linens. The colors of nature inspired the palette of clothing and accessories, and the mellow golden light of the season often made even the most weathered features appear softer. Throughout the year, beauty was not static, it bent and swayed with the climate, with each season adding its own filter to the way people were seen and judged. Those who could adapt their grooming, attire, and presentation to the shifting natural backdrop not only preserved their standing, but could even heighten their appeal in the eyes of their peers. While climate and culture shaped beauty in slow, steady rhythms, history itself could change it overnight. Wars, famines, and epidemics didn't just alter lives, they left their mark on what people found attractive, and on how they measured worth. In times of war, ideals often leaned towards strength and resilience. Men with broad shoulders, sturdy frames, and visible vigor were prized as protectors, while women with a healthy, robust appearance were seen as symbols of fertility and endurance. Fine silks and delicate features lost some of their allure when survival demanded practical clothing and physical capability. Armor, scars, and even a certain ruggedness could become badges of honor. Epidemics, such as the Black Death, shifted these ideals yet again. With mortality all around, the value of health became paramount. Clear skin, bright eyes, and the appearance of vitality were no longer just about beauty, they were about signaling that you might survive. At the same time, the trauma of widespread loss led some to seek exaggerated signs of purity and divine favor, believing that a perfect outer form reflected an untouchable soul. Famine and hardship often redefined beauty in subtler ways. In lean years, softness and a bit of flesh could suggest wealth and stability, while in times of abundance, a slender frame might signal refinement and self-control. The pendulum swung with the fortunes of the land, and fashion followed accordingly. Throughout it all, beauty was never purely about aesthetics, it was a survival tool, a political instrument, and a mirror of the fears and hopes of the age. Looking back, medieval beauty standards may seem distant, even strange, shaped by beliefs we no longer share and circumstances we can scarcely imagine. Yet, at their core, they reveal something timeless. Our human desire to be seen, valued, and understood through the way we present ourselves to the world. In the Middle Ages, beauty was a language sometimes whispered, sometimes shouted, that spoke of class, morality, health, and destiny. It was a currency that could elevate or condemn, open doors or close them forever. And perhaps the greatest lesson is this: though the standards themselves change, the pressures they create remain. The mirror has shifted across centuries, but it still reflects the same longing to belong, to be admired, and to tell a story without uttering a word. In the end, medieval beauty was not just about faces or figures, it was about identity, survival, and the silent agreements a society makes about what is worthy of praise. A truth as relevant now as it was beneath the candlelight of 1,000 years ago.